Muchachos y muchachas, day 2 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. We left off yesterday with Larry Vysotsky, the pilot to Jeffrey Epstein, starting off his testimony, but then Judge Nathan calling it for a day, which then leads us to today. So Larry Vysotsky continues his witness testimony along with Jane, who is a pseudonym for the victim witness in the whole Ghislaine Maxwell trial. I will say that viewer discretion is advised, as there are some pretty graphic things that we're going to get into detail as testified by Jane. I'm just going to call her Jane Doe, but she's named as Jane in the trial. Stay right there. We're going to go through it. Folks, the world is literally becoming unhinged. Supply chains are breaking down. The critical shortages are showing up left and right. People can sense that the other shoe is about to drop. They're ordering emergency food like crazy, which means you should too before you can't get any. I'm talking about high quality emergency food you can get from My Patriot Supply. They're the nation's leading preparedness company, and they've served millions of American families. Now they want to help you by giving you $100 off their best-selling 3-month emergency food kit. This food stays fresh for up to 25 years in proper storage, so it'll be there when you need it. And the meals in this food kit average over 2,000 calories per day, so don't wait. Go to preparewithnatly.com and claim your 3-month emergency food kit while you still can. You'll save $100 per kit if you act now. That's preparewithnatly.com. There continues to be a surge of orders. Make sure yours is one of them. preparewithnatly.com. All right, now that we're back, let's jump into some of these details. Now, one detail that came about last night that I found very relevant, because as we learned yesterday, the flight logs will be implicated in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. So this piece of information came about last night. I found it super relevant. So let's just glance over this just a little bit. Markets Insider reported last night that the FAA accidentally disclosed more than 2,000 flight records associated with Jeffrey Epstein's private jets. Now, just kind of genericizing this, the Markets Insider, this news publication, they actually requested via FOIA a request for some more information, in which was denied. Now, they were sent information anyway on an unrelated request. And so this is where it gets a bit interesting. In March of 2020, FAA denied our request, saying that the responsive records originate from an investigative file that were therefore exempt from disclosure. The agency cited Exemption 7A, which Congress designed to shield records that were compiled for law enforcement and could reasonably expected to interfere with an enforcement proceeding. The FAA did not specify which enforcement proceeding the records might interfere with. Epstein's ex-girlfriend and confidant, Ghislaine Maxwell, faces trial for sex trafficking charges this month. Despite its original denial, the FAA inadvertently mailed Insider a portion of Epstein's flight records alongside correspondence for an unrelated FOIA request. That is curious. Why would they do that? You would think that they would be very careful about where they mail these requests to. Maybe a mix-up at the office? Maybe a intentional oopsie. Who knows? The records contain data on 2,300 flights among private jets and registered to Epstein between 1998 and 2020. Most of them previously appeared in the Insider's searchable database of all known flights connected to Epstein. Nonetheless, FAA records also reveal 704 previously unknown flights taken by Epstein's planes. These include hundreds of trips from a 3-year-long gap, in the public record between 2013 and 2016. When the jet's movements were unaccounted for. Continued, the new flight records do not include the names of the passengers. However, Markets Insider suggests that there are some context clues that might implicate certain associates and where they were flying to. So continued on, it just goes over that there are records of some previously owned planes, Gulfstream, I believe 2 and 4, that were sold, and one of which was sold right before the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein. With that being said, there is an updated searchable database of these new updated flight logs. And, I will link that in the description below if that's something that you're inclined to research yourself. If you have the mind of monkeyworks and the intel to maybe decipher some of these context clues, maybe that could be helpful. We'll see. Now let's jump to the trial. So yesterday, we left off with Lawrence Paul Wissoski, Larry for short, starting off his testimony, his witness account, and his cross-examination. Shortly after he began, Judge Nathan called it for the day, and thus we continued on today. So today, Larry Wissoski, Jeffrey Epstein's longtime former pilot, described the late pedophile's many properties, including his sprawling Zorro Ranch in New Mexico and posh apartment in Paris. Wissoski, who took the stand again today, was also asked about the layout of Little St. James, Epstein's Caribbean hideaway nicknamed Pedophile Island by the locals. The pilot then testified about the Boeing 727, as we know as the infamous Lolita Express, used to shuttle the financier and his guests between 2000 and 2004, calling it a recreational vehicle. Now, continued on, and we're going to get into some details. I am going to go to the transcript this time and actually, dictate that for you guys so you'll just have that assessment together. Jeffrey Epstein's long-term pilot, Larry Wissoski, said under cross-examination that he never witnessed sex acts or underage girls without their parents aboard several private aircraft, and he piloted for the multimillionaire pedophile. I never saw any sexual activity, no, Wissoski told defense attorney Christian Everdale, who quizzed the pilot about the stand on the 1,000 or so flights he piloted from the 1990s to 2004. Now, I am going to get into some of that detail because I find some of the details that Wissoski revealed, although he says no, a little bit conflicting. Wissoski said that he did not notice any underage girls without their parents on the plane. That included both Epstein's accuser, Virginia Roberts, and a victim identified as Jane at the trial, who testified today as well. Wissoski said he flew Roberts in the mid to late 90s, but believed her to be a shorter woman with dirty blonde hair. He added that he believed Epstein associate named Jane that he met on one of the planes was a mature woman with some piercing powder blue eyes. Prosecutors entered a birth certificate for Jane into evidence under seal. Now, this is where I want to take it to the actual transcript as given by the independent journalist Matthew Russell from Inner City Press. And as I stated yesterday, the reason why I find his testimony so interesting is because he has been calling out a lot of these details from the jump. He actually was one of the first journalists to expose Terramar and their Ghislaine Maxwell's involvement with Terramar with the UN and said players. Now, with that being said, I believe that he has a great interest to be as transparent and transcribe this as close word for word as possible. So this is where we can begin with some of the transcript. So, Attorney USA 𝘏𝘶𝘮, who is on the prosecution team against Maxwell, asks Wissoski, did Ms. Maxwell have assistants? Wissoski said she did. She then asked him, can you name some assistants? Wissoski said, Kimberly and, of course, Sarah Kellen. As you guys may note, that is a very infamous player who was implicated in the Epstein saga. Is that Miss Kellen? An exhibit is a woman in a bright green dress. Wissoski identifies her and says, yes. Then 𝘏𝘶𝘮 asks, what's this? Wissoski, the entrance to Mr. Epstein's Zorro Ranch. You guys remember in the play-by-play by New York Post, they said that he described Zorro Ranch and many other properties. There is a triple-wide trailer with a faux western facade. We had a runway and a hangar for our aircraft. 𝘏𝘶𝘮 then asks, how many acres was Mr. Epstein's ranch? Wissoski said 10,000 acres. Attorney USA 𝘏𝘶𝘮 then asked, did you ever go into the main residence? Wissoski replies, yes, to pick up luggage, to install electronics. Mr. Epstein was a real audiophile. He had a home theater with a drop-down screen. He had a little family room off to the side. Now, I will add as some commentary and knowledge of what is alleged inside Zorro Ranch was that there was supposedly, allegedly, this server room. It was there were so many servers and electronics installed into his home that it took out an entire family room. Now, that is what is alleged. That is what is alleged. So I find this piece of information kind of supporting and leveraging that. Comey then asks him, turning now to Mr. Epstein's island, what is it called? 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 replies, Little St. James. It was a regular destination, also flew the helicopter from St. Thomas to Little St. James, also more electronics installation. Comey then asks, how could you get there? He says, boat. She asks, okay, where did you meet Miss Maxwell? 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 says, she had a 3-bedroom apartment, I installed electronics there too. Then she bought her own townhouse. Then she asked, why did you go there? And he says, luggage. And then Comey asks, did Miss Maxwell ever fly the helicopter? 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 says, many times. Attorney USA Comey then asks, what are these photos? And then he says, that's Mr. Epstein in front of his plane. The plane is black and Epstein is standing in front of it with a yellow windbreaker with a smile. Attorney USA Comey then asks for Mr. Epstein, did you ever fly to Traverse City, Michigan? 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 replies, yes. We have been there all summer for fall cherry season. Comey then asks, where did you pick up his luggage? 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 then says, the Interlochen School of Music Center for Arts. Now, yesterday, there was a testimony retract that. There was an opening argument by the prosecution team in which they named a summer camp for talented children. There was a children's camp in which they vacation near. Now, I'm going to assume, without knowing this concretely, that this was indeed the summer camp that they talked about, but I don't know that for sure. All right. Now, scrolling through, let's get through some of this information. Everdale, who is on the defense team, then cross-examines 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒, and he says, let's see, I hope you had a present break. You may proceed. Continued. If Mr. Epstein, this is again the defense team for Maxwell, if Mr. Epstein was engaging in sexual acts with underage girls, he probably would have told you not to leave the cockpit, correct? Objection. Judge Nathan says overruled, and 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 replies correct. Now, this is the piece of information I find particularly interesting and a bit conflicting with the opposing arguments, the defense team. Let me read that again. Everdale asks, who is defending Maxwell? If Epstein were ever engaging in sex acts with underage girls, he probably would have told you not to leave the cockpit, correct? And Judge Nathan overrules it, after an objection, and 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 says correct. So this was before cell phones. So you were using beepers, correct? Yes, I recognize Mr. Epstein's number, and you'd mostly hear about flights of Ghislaine if she was going to be on them, right? And he says mostly. So just dialing back to that detail that I highlighted, if Epstein were to be on board with underage girls or victims, he says Epstein would have told you not to leave the cockpit, and 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 replies correct. Now, I don't know how you guys take that, but I also take that as a piece of conflicting information, because if this was true, what if he was on the plane with underage girls? And 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒's testimony is that he never saw underage girls. So who's to say that he was in a cockpit with the door closed and never left, excuse me. I just find that piece working both sides, if not a little bit against their defense. Just perplexes me. And then they go into more detail. So former President Bill Clinton flew on the plane, right? 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 says yes. Everdale then asks, were you to clean up? And he says yes, but some passengers, you were never told the names, right? Correct. Everdale then says, I want to ask you about a few specific flights. You mentioned Interlochen, a art center. Did you know that Epstein himself attended the summer camp when he was a child? 𝘏𝑗𝑔𝑒 says, I was not, as in he was not aware of that. So I guess with this piece of information, we can conclude that the Interlochen summer camp was indeed the summer camp that was in the opening arguments of the prosecution team yesterday. On your flights to Interlaken, wasn't 𝘱𝘏𝘃 on one of them? He says, yes, he was. And Epstein had a cabin there, right? Yes. And you flew Mr. Epstein to Columbus, Ohio to see Les Wexner, right? 𝘱𝘏𝑠ky said yes. Now, there was a lot of very heavy hitters in this cross-examination statement. I just want to give you guys just a quick rundown who 𝘱𝘏𝑃𝘃 is. And, you know, I'm just going to do a generic high-level Wikipedia really quick. 𝘱𝘏𝑃𝘃 is an Israeli-American violinist, conductor, and music teacher. Perlman has performed worldwide and throughout the United States in venues that included the state dinner at the White House honoring Queen Elizabeth II and President Barack Obama's inauguration. He has conducted the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, and the Westchester Philharmonic. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015. He was received at the 16 Grammy Awards, including the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award and 4 Emmys. So, anyway, with that being said, I don't know why that's relevant. I just like to give a little bit of, background. I'm not quite sure if the person is. Les Wexner, as you guys may know this name already, is he's the founder of L Brands, who owns a chain of retail stores. Victoria's Secret, Limited, I believe the Limited 2, I think Express is within that, but nonetheless, some major retail chains that you might note. Also, Les Wexner had the power of attorney, he gave the power of attorney over his fortune to Jeffrey Epstein. And the woman calling Jane, you knew her real name, right? And 𝘱𝘏𝑠ky says, I do. Everdell then asks, beyond striking blue eyes, you have seen that she has a large breast, right? And she says she was a mature woman. Everdell says, I'm sorry, we're having a choreography issue, and I guess there was a problem, and so they went into break. All right, so that is the first thread here. And let's jump back to just the generalizations just to get some high-level information. Maxwell's attorney, Christian Everdell, during the cross-examination of Jeffrey Epstein's former pilot, asked about the gifts of the sex fiend bestowed upon his longtime employee. Larry 𝘱𝘏𝑠ky Jr., who worked for Epstein for close to 30 years, received a number of pricey gifts throughout his employment, including 480 acres of land on the pedophile's New Mexico ranch for him to build a house. The financier even paid for 𝘱𝘏𝑠ky's 2 daughters' private school education, the pilot testified. Yes, he believed in higher education, 𝘱𝘏𝑠ky said. Epstein also listed a number of fancy sports under 𝘱𝘏𝑠ky's name, including sports cars is what they meant. Land Rover, Mercedes, and Jaguar, he said. The pilot said the cars were Epstein's, but he and other staff were allowed to drive them near his Palm Beach, Florida mansion. So, Jeffrey Epstein's former pilot, Larry 𝘱𝘏𝑠ky, is back on the stand following the court's lunch break. 𝘱𝘱𝑠ky, who was employed by Epstein for nearly 30 years, testified that he never had an inkling that his boss, Maxwell, were allegedly abusing young girls. I would have quit my job, he had. And then continued on is where we go into the first accuser's witness testimony, who is known as Jane as a pseudonym. One of the 4 alleged victims mentioned in the indictment against Maxwell had just taken the stand. The woman is testifying under pseudonym Jane, who was frequently in the room when you had sexual contact with Jeffrey Epstein when you were 14 years old. The prosecutor asked Ghislaine Maxwell. She replied. Now, this is where we are going to get into some further detail within this witness testimony. So I will say that this gets a bit graphic, so viewer discretion is definitely advised, and this is definitely not intended for kids to hear. So with that form of discretion and warning, we will continue on. So continued on. Here we go. So this is the first accuser, Jane. Comey asks, how old were you when you first had sexual contact with Jeffrey Epstein? She replied, 14 years old. Who was in the room? Ghislaine Maxwell, she replies. Do you see her there? Yes, there in a sort of beige turtleneck. She has identified the defendant. What type of work did your father do? He was a musical composer. He died of leukemia. His employer has canceled his health insurance without him knowing. We essentially went bankrupt and moved out. 𝘏𝑗 then says, were you at the Interlaken? Did you meet the couple? Jane says, I'm sorry, let me repeat that. When you were at Interlaken, did you meet the couple? And she replied, yes. The woman had a dog and the man said they were big benefactors. They asked for my mother's phone number and a landline. 𝘏𝑗 then asked, when you visited, what do you remember about spending time at the pool? And then she replies, there were 4 women and Ghislaine, all topless, and some of them were naked. I was shocked. I hadn't seen that before. Maxwell would ask me if I had boyfriends. Continued on. 𝘏𝑗 then asked, did Epstein begin to pay for things for you? Jane then replies, voice lessons, clothes, things for school. And then 𝘏𝑗 asks, did Maxwell give you some advice? Jane says, if you F them, you can always F them. They're sort of grandfathered in. I didn't know what it meant. I'm not going to place assumption on the witness testimony. I'm just going to transpire this as it goes. Then 𝘏𝑗 asked, what did they tell you about their social circle? Jane said, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Mike Wallace. How was the house decorated? Art sculptures, pictures of famous people, presidents. I thought some of the art was odd, naked women, creepy animals. Pseudonyms, witness Jane, Epstein took me into the pool house. He proceeded to masturbate on me. Then he went into the bedroom and cleaned himself and acted like nothing happened. I'd never seen that before. Then 𝘏𝑗 asks, did you keep spending time with him? And Jane replied, yes. Jane then proceeds to testify that Jeffrey Epstein proceeded to masturbate again. Ghislaine was rubbing on him, kissing on him. How old were you? She replied, 14. 𝘏𝑗 then asks, what was Miss Maxwell's demeanor like? And she said she was very casual. She's like, this is entirely normal. I was confused. When you were 14, you have no idea what is going on. 𝘏𝑗 then asked, did Jeffrey Epstein touch you? And Jane says, yes, everywhere. 𝘏𝑗 then asked, did you touch Mr. Epstein? Jane paused and said, everywhere. 𝘏𝑗 asks, I'm sorry, I have to ask you this, but did he use sex toys? Jane says, yes, like those back massagers. They were painful. He did it anyway. 𝘏𝑗 then asked, did Maxwell touch your body? And she says, yes. 𝘏𝑗 then asks, how often did these things happen? Jane replies, every time I visited the house. Did you travel to his other homes? Yes. Well, back to that, when other people were present, how did incidents start? Jane said, Jeffrey would say, follow him. Follow him where? To his bedroom. Or the massage room. He would get on the massage table and it would sort of turn into this orgy. How often was Miss Maxwell present? Jane replies, I can't give the precise number. 𝘏𝑗 asks, during the incident you were 14, was Maxwell in the room? Jane says, yes. When you were 14, 15, and 16, how many times did you travel with them? About 10 times to NYC, New Mexico, and on Jeffrey's plane. 𝘏𝑗 asks, what kind of artwork did they have? Jane said, yes, it was weird. Animal heads, naked women, orgies. It didn't seem very unusual at this point. And then she asked, how did you feel in the New York house? And she said, like someone was always watching you. Now, I will insert some form of knowledge through my research and documentation over the last 1.5 to 2 years. When this documentation was unsealed, I was keeping track with it at the Daily TrafficK. It was alleged that there were some sort of spying gadgets or some sort of spying activities within the houses by Ghislaine Maxwell herself. Now, I can't recall completely, so I'm just going to say that it is alleged that Ghislaine Maxwell would spy on the victims even when they were in the restroom or bathing room. 𝘏𝑗 then asks, what would Epstein ask you to do? Jane says to straddle his face, to pinch his nipples. 𝘏𝑗 says, were there times that Maxwell was present? Jane said, yes. 𝘏𝑗 asks, in the New York house, where did this happen? Jane said, in the massage room. 𝘏𝑗 asks, on the trip to New Mexico, where did you spend most of your time? Jane replies, on the ranch. It was in the middle of nowhere. 𝘏𝑗 asks, did anyone come to your room? Jane replies, yes. Someone came in and said, Jeffrey wants to see you, and escorted me to see him. Jane, sobbing, says, I did not want to go see him. Who told you Epstein wanted to see you? Don't know. I had to fly back to Florida to go to school. I took a commercial flight, but I was only 15, didn't even have a driver's learner's permit. Jane then replies, so I couldn't get on the flight back to Florida. I had no ID. I freaked out, but Maxwell helped solve it. She talked to someone and I got on the plane. Then kind of illustrating that Maxwell possibly had some ties to the aviation industry, aside from the private jets. She obviously had a lot of connections. Comey asks, what was your home life like at the time? Jane says, we were losing our home. We moved into a pool house, which is typically a lot of times. Again, I will just insert my knowledge here. Traffickers usually do go for the most vulnerable people in our society, going and identifying specifically people who are vulnerable, who have a broken life, who have a broken home. So this is very usual for a trafficker's tactic. If indeed, again, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were traffickers. Okay. Again, I have to state that because all individuals are innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. We're losing our home. We moved into a pool house. Jane said, my mom was enamored by the idea that these affluent people were taking an interest in me. Then Maxwell's lawyer says, objection, hearsay. Comey then replies, it's for the effect on the listener. Then Judge Nathan rules that they may ask the question, but not what the mother said. Could we approach? Judge Nathan, the jurors' snacks are here. Let's take a 10-minute break. So they did take a 10-minute break. So continued on. They go into some of the, that was more specific to the testimony that the witness gave as to the account with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, one thing that I wanted to highlight here was the Camp Interlochen in Michigan. Now, this was a cabin, there was a cabin that Epstein purchased in Michigan, I believe, and I will bring this information here. This is actually reported by the Daily Beast back in August of 2019. Epstein had his own lodge at the Interlochen's prestigious arts camp for kids. Now, again, some of the information that was suggested by the Maxwell defense team was that, did you know that Epstein went to this school when he was a child? This is some suggestive detail that I believe they injected into the trial just to kind of, sway the jurors to believe that, oh, he has some sort of reminiscence or childhood memory here. So therefore, maybe there's some familiarity with the property. But he indeed did own that log cabin near the Interlochen School of Arts. During the 90s, Epstein apparently had another getaway at Michigan in the cabin. There was where the 66-year-old financier was a donor to the revered Interlochen Center for Arts. The fine arts boarding school and camp had bankrolls that Jeffrey Epstein's scholarship lodge on its campus. So continued on, there is some detail that there was a short drive from the school along with two other passengers. In August of 1998, Epstein and his alleged madame, British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, took a 5-day jaunt to Traverse City, Michigan, which you guys heard in 𝘞𝑚𝑜𝑠ky's testimony is one of the destinations he recalls traveling to, which is a short drive from the school along with two other passengers, according to flight records. So, Traverse City, short drive to the Interlochen cabin. Make of it what you will, but this was reported within their testimony. So, with that being said, this pretty much surmises, and now there were some big names that 𝘞𝑚𝑜𝑠ky did drop within this testimony. Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Kevin Spacey, Les Wexner, Itzhak Perlman, George Mitchell, who was an American politician, diplomat, lawyer in the Democratic Party. He was under the Barack Obama presidency. And then there was also an astronaut, Glenn, who I believe died, or he visited some sort of Wexner Institute at one point. So it just kind of illustrates how connected everything really was. So anyway, I know that this was long-winded, but this was the testimony as given by the pilot and the first witness, Jane. So this is very winded, and again, I will continue to cover this as much as I can, and as more details come into light, I will definitely report this. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I know, again, that this is a lot of information, but as we know, information is everywhere. This isn't live streamed. And as you know, certain press do get listen-ins, I find it important to cross this sort of transcript as well as a play-by-play, just to give you guys as much context as to what's going on in this trial. You guys, again, give me your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for staying tuned into the trial. I will catch you guys in the next episode as well as tomorrow's coverage. Have a great night. Rest easy.